Hello and welcome to another season of Lifestyle Gardening. I'm Kim Todd. We are thrilled to be back to share new ideas and to help you get ready for the upcoming gardening season. Today we're going to be focusing on garden trends for this year. We're going to be showing you the differences between your conifers, and we'll sit down with Backyard Farmer panelist Jeff Culbertson to talk about making good decisions when it comes to your ash trees. First, Jeff's going to help us with another important topic, and that is winter watering. It might seem like a strange idea, but helping those trees and shrubs through a dry winter can make quite a difference in their health and vitality in the spring. Here's Jeff to tell us more.
One thing we would all prefer is a dry, warm winter. But for newly planted plants, especially from this late summer into the fall, that can be really tough on them. And the root systems dry out, it'll really impact flowering, and really you may see increase in diseases, susceptibility to insects as we go into the spring. So one easy thing we can do is to go out and periodically check the soil around these plants and make sure that it's moist. A screwdriver or something like this works well. This is an easy thing that most of us have, is a good screwdriver. Go out and check periodically and make sure that we have good soil moisture. Again, we want to look at days that are above 40 degrees. There's no reason to go out and try to water things when the ground is frozen. A 5-gallon bucket is a good measuring cup to use. So we'll do 5 gallons for smaller shrubs, something under 3 foot. Maybe some of your perennials would appreciate that as well. For bigger shrubs, you're going to want 2 or 3 buckets, 1 2-inch caliper tree, 4 to 6 buckets. And for any of these, we want to make sure we cover the whole root zone, so kind of the drip line where the edges of the branches are, make sure we moisten that area of the soil around the plants. And we'll want to do this at least once a month, depending on the extent of the warm and dry weather. We may want to do it twice a month. Evergreens in particular are susceptible to drying out over the winter, so those are ones you want to give extra attention to and maybe check those a little bit more frequently. So you do this, and then come spring, your plants will be in good shape. They'll be ready to flower and perform for you just like you hope they would.
Good gardeners understand how devastating it can be to our trees and shrubs to go through the winter without the water they need. It does depend on how much moisture we get, but on some of those warmer days, you'll be doing those plants a big favor by giving them a much needed drink. For our first landscape lesson this year, we're going to talk about what's new and exciting for 2020. Trends in the gardening world can help us be creative and try those new things in and around our homes. We'll hear about the color of the year and give you other great ideas to get you off to the right start when the weather warms up. We always like to start one of our segments for Lifestyle Gardening with what are the new garden trends for this year. So in 2020, we have a huge list of interesting garden trends depending on where you look and who you ask. Everything from the Garden Media Group to Green Industry Pros to Garden Design all have a little bit of a different idea about garden trends, but there are some consistent elements. Let's start with what everybody gets excited about in the gardening world and in the design world, and that is, what is the color of the year? It's blue. It's classic blue. So everything from garden containers to how you select plant material for the garden becomes really an excellent thing to think about if you want to change some color. Color pop is always a trend, and that is true this year. And remember that one of the classic color combinations in the design world is blue with yellow with silver. So it could be as simple as changing out your containers. It could be the napkins on your table, anything that really gives you that sense of blue. One of the interesting trends also this year has a great deal to do with who is gardening. And gardening for the beauty and the enjoyment is actually a trend that is up. While surprisingly, gardening for food is down, and maybe that has something to do with the availability of higher quality produce in many locations. We don't know that for sure. There still is a trend to be able to make a lot of pieces of the landscape have more than one purpose. So choosing plant material for its edibility, choosing plants for scent, and certainly for seasonal interest. One of the great trends and most interesting trends has to do with where people are choosing to live. And that, of course, is the growth of cities. So our environments are becoming very, very urban. And a part of that urbanism is spaces that are smaller, which we've talked about before, both on this show and on Backyard Farmer. And what that really means is maybe there is more gardening or landscape material that goes on patios or on rooftops, or goes vertical. So vertical gardening is also a trend. And that can be something as simple as growing a vine up a wall or up a trellis, or it can be more complicated and actually figuring out how to create a structure where you can grow herbs, you can do essentially a green wall. We also have great interest in simplicity and going to materials that are clean, contemporary, simplistic in terms of their management. And certainly one of the really, really important trends has to do with ecology, best practices, sustainable practices, taking care of the soil, adding in diversity for wildlife and for human intent, returning to native plant material to the extent possible, given the conditions that we're working in, adding water to the landscape in a small quantity or a large one, being mindful of certainly the essential ingredients in soil, repurposing materials as opposed to starting over and throwing more materials into the landscape, considering going best practices, whether that is interpreted as organic or not, but touching the earth far more lightly and doing it in a way that gives you great pleasure as you work in your own landscape. So one of the things to take away from with garden trends in any year is what are the trends that you love and you would like to initiate into your landscape, and are they trends that are long-term, that give you great satisfaction and happiness, that improve the environment, or are they those fun, funky little, let's just do this year, we'll see whether we like it, and maybe next year we'll do something different. Your garden catalogs, those design magazines, the internet, and of course Backyard Farmer are all great places to begin exploring these trends. Keep in mind your yards and gardens don't have to be static every season, and trying new things and new techniques are really a part of the fun of gardening. We're going to take a few minutes to sit down with Jeff Culbertson to talk about a serious problem that is facing a lot of homeowners and communities around the state: what to do with your ash trees. Emerald ash borer has devastated ash trees in several states. So far in Nebraska, we've been lucky to not have too many confirmed sightings, but Jeff is going to talk about what plans are being discussed for those ash trees on East Campus. I'm talking with Jeff Culbertson today, and of course he needs no introduction other than the fact that he sits in that hort chair or the path chair or the turf chair. We haven't put you into entomology yet, I don't think.
I don't think so. No,
but
not
you
yet.
could.
I suppose I could, sure.
Especially since what we're going to talk about is on your radar screen, because you're cutting down ash all over campus due to emerald ash borer.
Emerald ash borer, right.
So, Jeff, you are in removal mode on both campuses, I think, at this point. And people who don't really understand what's going on or the intensity with which you're needing to do it, talk about how many you think you're going to be removing, why right now, what you're doing with that wood, and of course the long-term proposal or plans for, are we recanopying some of those streets?
Right, right. You know, we have, well, before this week, and we haven't removed that many, a handful this week, we have about 306 ash on campus, something like that. So roughly about 300, which is less than 5% of our total tree population. So it's a relatively small portion of our tree population, unlike maybe some of the areas that we've seen that really devastated by, where it's a very high percentage.
Right.
The one issue with our ash on campus is they tend to be planted in concentrated areas. So, you know, 10 in this area, 5 in this area, something like that, versus kind of widely scattered throughout. So one of the things we're looking at, the interesting thing about emerald ash borer is that it's unlike a lot of borers that tend to go after trees that are in a declining state, or we'll call stressed, but stress could be a lot of things.
Right.
But I think of something that's declining in some way. These are kind of equal opportunity. They'll hit healthy trees and sick trees and little trees and big trees. So from that standpoint, we are looking at trees that we would typically decide to make a change in that location regardless if it was emerald ash borer or not. So since we haven't really planted ash for maybe 10 years or so, we do have trees that are in the 40 and 50 and 60-year-old range that would generally be on something where we'd be considering removals regardless.
Right.
And they are showing some signs of decline like we would expect an urban tree to show.
Right.
So that's really what we're in the process of selecting, those trees that we think are concerned from that standpoint, and kind of moving forward with that, maybe a little bit more aggressively than we would normally, with the idea that, just like you're saying, that once those trees come out, then we'll bring something else in to kind of re-landscape that area, re-urbanly forest that area.
So one of the interesting comments that you made is, they are concentrated in areas. And I know with kind of traditional urban planting, it's tree-lined streets, they're all the same tree.
Right.
Are we thinking you're going to go back in with tree-lined streets that are all the same, or the whole diversity of species and some similarity is maybe a direction to go?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think that's what and that's what we have been doing. We've done a lot of work, especially on city or on East Campus and some on city, where we're bringing in overstory species, but it's a mix of overstory species.
Right.
Or if we're bringing in some evergreens, it's a variety of evergreens, because we know they have some issues too.
Right.
So you're right. I think that's kind of a overriding principle, is that if we're going to bring something in, not to say that there's not several of one kind in a particular area, but we try to mix that up.
Right, and so you're really getting out in front of this because EAB has not been confirmed on campus, is that right?
Yes, we haven't seen, and even with our removals, we're not seeing any obvious EAB, no little D-shaped holes or that sort of thing. But I think for any homeowner, when you have the top of a tree dying out, and that's one of the, EAB is kind of like, it has a lot of symptoms, but it could be 7 different things.
Right.
And so when we see some suckering, or if we see the upper canopy starting to decline, then you think, well, okay, I mean, it could be that, or it could be other things, lilac borer or something else.
Something like that, yeah.
Right.
And people, of course, always ask the question, can you go right back into the same hole? And I know you have the monster stump grinder. Is that a good idea, or are you going to see settling, or should people really think, if they're going to have an ash or another tree removed, move that tree over a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. Even with the big stump grinders, you can only get a small portion of the root system that's there.
Right.
And so, I mean, just for the life of the next tree, I think the idea is you'd like to get them someplace else. I mean, you have to imagine things like nutrients and that sort of thing have been just robbed from that portion of the soil because they've had a big tree there doing that work. So.
Right. So since some of these trees are pretty big, I'm assuming your chip pile this winter is going to be big also. I think you've been in kind of a dearth of chips for a little while. Yes?
Well, it ebbs and flows too, depending on what our work is. And so kind of, even if it wasn't ash, we'd be doing a lot of pruning this time of year, especially once we get past the first of the year. I like to kind of ramp up our pruning before spring hits.
Right.
So this is kind of our whatever wealthy time when it comes to chips. We have more of that. But you're right. I mean, that's one of the things to look at. The recommendation is kind of 1 inch on 2 sides with the size of the chip, and we have a real shredded mulch, so it actually is much less than that. So I'm not worried about that. But you're right, it does contribute to the brush pile. So.
All right, excellent. And we, of course, will all look forward to seeing all those new trees come on campus.
Yeah, absolutely. We're looking for a big spring. We planted 150 trees with some of your classes this fall, so that'll add to it. So.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Excellent. Thanks, Jeff.
You bet.
As Jeff said, a thorough evaluation of your own ash trees will help greatly in making decisions about whether to keep them or cut them, and then planting something else. Plant diversity around your home is really vital to avoiding problems in the landscape, some of which, of course, can be really heartbreaking and cause a great change in what you live with. You know, it's time now to answer a few of your questions. We've made a slight change this year, so instead of me giving you the answers, we've asked some of our regular Backyard Farmer panelists to focus on some of our frequently asked questions. Backyard Farmer is off the air right now. You can still send us an email. We'll start answering those again, and that address is byf@unl.edu. You can also stay in touch with us by liking our Facebook page. Right now, let's get some of our answers to those most frequently asked questions.
Okay, so we get this question a lot about, well, I want to do this treatment in my yard, but I don't want to use chemicals, or it has to be organic. And sometimes we have to talk about exactly what do those terms mean, because there's some confusion and some misunderstanding about what organic versus conventional means. So first off, we have to say that if you're a conventional farmer or a conventional gardener and you're using those conventional chemicals, research tells us that as long as you're using them safely and according to the label is the law, you have to follow the label, that it has minimal risk to human health, meaning that even if you use them, if you follow the law about how long you have to wait or how much you apply, that there is low risk to using those as labeled. However, we do know that some people have sensitivities or they want to be organic. And one thing we have to remember is that organic does not mean chemical-free. First off, we sort of cringe whenever we hear people say the term chemical-free, because technically everything is made with chemicals. We are made of chemicals, even water is chemical, and air is a chemical. Everything is made of chemicals. So whenever we use that term, it's sort of very unscientific. So you want to say if you don't use pesticides or you only use organic pesticides. And that's another thing we often get confusion about is people say, well, I only eat organic or grow organically. That means that there's no pesticide. And that's simply not true, especially if you're buying organics at the grocery store. There's a big list of things that have been approved for organic production that you can spray to kill diseases or insects on those plants. They just come from a natural source. So saying that organic means that you or whoever grew your food did not use chemicals is not necessarily the case. And so that's an important distinction to remember whenever you're thinking about these different terms. So you heard me mention that there are a long list of things that you can use for organic production. And a lot of farmers use those that are growing organically, and a lot of home gardeners should think about using those as well. Because sometimes when people say they garden organically, that means that they don't use anything at all, and they might have diseases or insects running amok in the garden. And I actually call that gardening method organic by default, or organic by neglect. Because you're not treating anything. But there's lots of naturally occurring elements, bacteria, plant extracts that can be used to control diseases and insects. And there's a list called OMRI. It's the Organic Materials Research Institute, where you can find all of those things that are approved for organic production. Now, that doesn't mean that they're 100% safe or even safer than the conventional treatments. You still have to use them with care. They do have some effects if you misuse them. So you want to be safe whenever you're using those organics. So once again, organic doesn't necessarily mean chemical-free. It means that it's naturally occurring, and you want to watch for those labels whenever you're picking out stuff for your garden and treat those diseases and insects responsibly.
Unfortunately, we can only tell so much on diseases based on pictures, and often we will request a physical sample so that we can actually look at that and try to identify the pathogen that is causing infection. If you are looking to submit a sample to the Plant and Pest Diagnostic Clinic, we do have a physical office that's located on UNL's East Campus, and we are at 448 Plant Science Hall. The physical address of that is 1875 North 38th Street in Lincoln, Nebraska. Zip code is 68583. And so samples can be dropped off Monday through Friday, anytime between 8 and 5 p.m. Or if you're looking to mail a sample, you can mail a sample to that address as well. If you are going to mail a sample, we ask that you mail them during the first part of the week, so Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. That avoids the sample from getting caught in a mail truck over the weekend, and after 3 or 4 days in the back of a mail truck in a Ziploc bag, those samples may be pretty degraded and we may not be able to tell what's really going on with them. And so the earlier that we can get a sample is always going to be better. And if you are going to submit a sample, a few other things that we ask. One, please take some pictures. Pictures really do tell us a lot, especially because when we're getting this sample, it's going to be a couple of days after you've seen it, and maybe symptoms have progressed. And we always like to know what it is that you're actually seeing. And then we ask that you collect as much plant material as possible. And so if the plant is small enough, this will include the root ball. And so just dig up that entire plant. You can enclose the root ball in a Ziploc bag and then place that entire sample into a larger plastic bag. And then please add a dry paper towel to absorb any moisture that may be present. And then put it in a sturdy box for shipping to the Plant and Pest Diagnostic Clinic. Additionally, emails with pictures can be sent to plantclinic@unl.edu to answer some more of your questions.
A big thank you to our panelists for helping us answer your most frequently asked questions. And of course, we'll explore more topics on next week's show. We're going to round out today's program by taking a look at the importance of knowing what kinds of conifers you have. Many people interchange the words pine and spruce and fir, but those words actually refer to specific trees. And knowing the differences can help you care for them in the right ways. We get a lot of questions on Backyard Farmer about pines, but they might not be pines. So what I want to do today is talk a little bit about the difference between some of our primary conifers, pine, spruce, and fir. And it makes a difference because the growth habit is different, the growth rate is different, the pests and diseases are different, and how they change character as they age is definitely different. So let's start with pines. Pines are one of the conifers that actually carry their needles in a bundle. And that is totally different from spruce and fir. So you will have a 2-needle pine, a 3-needle pine, a 5-needle pine. These are called fascicles. So if you pull that apart, you'll see 2, 3, 5 needles all coming from the same spot. Our pines typically start life as a pyramid, but as they age, they can become what we call an overstory tree. So they lose their lower branches, they might become picturesque, flat-topped, really a totally different character, and that means in the landscape they are going to take on both a different use and a different appearance. Pines also can be differentiated, of course, by their cones, and cones are one of the ways that we can say this is a white pine, this is a ponderosa, this is an Austrian pine. The scales on a pine cone are typically very hard and very stable. So they will fall off, they'll hang on the tree. Some cones ripen immediately, some are 2 or 3 years. But when they fall, they will typically remain in the landscape so that you can use them as a piece of identification for a very long time. Spruce and fir are harder for a lot of people to tell apart, and there are some differences. A lot of people are very familiar with Colorado blue spruce because, of course, it's blue and it's a pointy thing. One of the main differences between spruce, fir, and pine altogether is that pines carry their needles, as I said, in a bundle. Spruce and fir both have needles that are individual, so a single needle at one point on the branch. You can see the differences in the bud just looking at this Colorado blue spruce. Spruce and fir start life as a pyramid. They usually end life as a pyramid as well, so they will keep their lower branches. They will just elongate and spread slightly, but keep that pyramidal form unless they are shaded out or unfortunately pruned up for some reason. So they do not change shape when they age like a pine does. The other thing about spruce is that their cones are smaller. They are stable, but they are typically have notched scales on them, and they are not quite as stable as pine cones. So you may not find them in the landscape for more than about a season or so. This is an example of a fir, and the firs also carry their needles individually. This one is showing a little bit of environmental damage, so they're not usually this yellow, but they also have a different bud. The fir needles are flat, and if you would try to roll a spruce needle between your fingers, that would be square. One of the really neat things about firs also that is different is when they're old enough to produce cones, the cones are in the upper part of the tree. They stand straight up, and then once they shatter, which they do, which is why people don't see the cones very often, all they leave is what is called the central axis. So we will get calls from people who have firs, and they say, these are dead little twig branches in my fir. No, they're not. That is a part of the cone. So again, one of the differences is the cones between those. And in addition, you'll notice that I can take my hand and run it over the fir, and I am not hollering because the needles on the fir are typically also not pointy and sharp. So again, it's important to know what kind of conifer you have in your landscape. These are only 3 examples, but they are really probably some of the most common examples. Pines carry their needles in a bundle and the cones are solid. Fir and spruce start life as a pyramid and end life as a pyramid, or else in the mulch pile. The cones on fir are going to shatter. The cones on spruce are not going to last as long as the cones on pines are. And this is a great example of a location on campus where you can see all 3 of those different types of conifers together in a group. Thank you so much again for joining us on Lifestyle Gardening. On our next program, we'll be hearing about what our insect friends do during the winter, and we'll take a look at caring for different trees and shrubs during the winter months. Don't forget to check us out on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. So good morning, good gardening. Thanks for watching. We'll see you all next time on Lifestyle Gardening.